Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Linda Yael Schiller, who's here to share with us her new book, PTSDreams. Transform your nightmares from trauma through Healing Dreamwork. So Linda is a mind, body, and spirit psychotherapist, consultant, author, and international teacher. She facilitates group dream circles, provides individual, group, and corporate consultations, and trains professionals on working with dreams. Linda has designed several innovative methods for dream work and is trained in numerous mind-body methods such as EMDR, EFT, energy psychology, Enneagram, and integrated trauma treatments. In addition to her professional work with dreams, she has been involved with her own dream sharing group for more than 30 years. So welcome to the show, Linda Yael Schiller.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
Well, I've been doing dream work for a long time. And I also, as a psychotherapist, have been doing trauma treatment for a long time. And I had written a book a few years ago called Modern Dream Work. That was more of an overview of looking at all different kinds of dreams from a psychospiritual perspective. And I actually wasn't planning to write a second book quite so soon. I knew that I wanted to write this book about working with nightmares and trauma. But then the pandemic happened, and we entered into a state of sort of global trauma in addition to the personal traumas that people had. So I just kind of got the message, don't wait, do it now. And that was my pandemic project.
I like how you start the book off by talking about how our dreams are really our subconscious slipping through during the middle of the night.
So we have multiple levels of consciousness, if you will, that range from being completely wide awake to being completely sound asleep in our deepest sleep state, which is our REM state. REM stands for rapid eye movement, which is where we have our deepest dreaming. And in between those states of completely wide awake and completely sound asleep in the deepest state, there are many other layers of consciousness that range from you're a little bit spacey and you're daydreaming, or you have a little dissociative moment where, like highway hypnosis, you're driving the car and you realize you missed your exit about 10 minutes ago. And then you think, oh dear, who's been driving for the last 10 minutes? And then you have those, then there's trance work in hypnotherapy states. There's altered states of consciousness if we ingest a medication or a recreational drug. And then there are those in-between states between waking and sleeping that Jung called the hypnopompic and hypnagogic zones, where we're not quite wide awake and we're not quite sound asleep, but these liminal states of consciousness where the images, the stories, and the pictures that come through actually do come from the same place as our deeper layers of nighttime dreaming. So that all being said, we can have images, stories, emotions from our unconscious self at a different layer of consciousness rise up both when we are asleep in our dreams and when we are in any of these other states of consciousness, including what we might call waking dreams. So that's, I think, what I mean when in the phrase when I said they can kind of slip through into our consciousness.
And so with that in mind, what is a PTS dream?
So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's the diagnostic category that's used by the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual in therapeutic coding, really, to identify that state of being when someone has experienced or witnessed a trauma where they are or feel like their life or their integrity or their safety has been threatened. So when we have a traumatic event happen in our lives, whether it's in our personal lives, in our familial life, in a global spectrum, we have normal reactions to it that range from having a startle response to having nightmares to having high anxiety or depression or feeling like we're numb. We can range from being overactivated or underactivated in a response to a trauma. And then ideally, if our system can metabolize what happened to us, and if we have enough support in our lives, we're able to metabolize the events that happen and sort of return to our homeostasis, to our even keel of before the trauma. So the D, which is the word stands for the disorder, really only becomes part of the diagnosis if someone has been experiencing the reactivity to traumatic events for more than 6 months following the trauma. Then it becomes sort of part of our system as opposed to not part of our system. And we call it disorder then. And then we might need to take additional steps, including seeking professional help to help us work through it. So in thinking about the nightmares that have been generated by trauma, I just put together the PTSD with the word dreams to come up with the title of PTSDreams.
A very clever way of bringing that together. And it has me thinking, at what point did you see that correlation between the trauma treatment you do and the dream work and having those come together?
So for a long time, people had been coming to me with their dreams and their nightmares in my practice. And the difference really between a dream and a nightmare is the emotional narrative that goes along with the dream. So we might have the same images or the same story, but depending on our emotions about those images in that story will determine whether it's a dream or a bad dream or a nightmare. So if our reactions and responses to the dream are, I feel pretty calm, I'm pretty happy, this was delightful, this was fun, then it's a regular dream. If our responses were, I'm feeling a little bit anxious or a little bit sad, but nothing too bad, I can't handle it, but it was upsetting still, that might be what we'd call a bad dream. If our reactions, though, are terror, dread, rage, unrelenting grief, and like when you go to the doctor's office and they say, rate your pain from 0 to 10, if it starts getting to a 5 or higher when you're rating the emotional response to the dream in the negative end of the spectrum, then we have a nightmare. So not just me in my practice, but also trauma researchers as well as dream and nightmare researchers for the last several decades know that having nightmares are one of the symptoms and one of the sequelae of having experienced trauma in one's life. And for people who've had acute traumatic events, for example, war veterans, they often have instant replay of the combat experiences, either in waking life, which then we call them flashbacks, or in their dreams, they have a replay of what they experienced, and then they have a nightmare of that type, which is like a replay of the trauma. And then the other type of nightmare from trauma is the type that is more metaphorical and symbolic. So sometimes we have a replay of the traumatic events just show up as if they were re-happening to us in our nightmares. But more often than not, we need tools and skill and assistance to unpack the layers, as Carl Jung would say, and sort of peel back the onion of what does this nightmare mean? What are these monsters and creepy crawlers and scary images in my dream? What do they have to do with my life? And then we need to work the material to figure that out so we can get some healing from the dreams and the nightmares and then into our lives.
So how do we hone into what is a dream, what is a nightmare, and what we should be paying attention to?
I would say pay attention to everything that your dreaming self, your dreaming muse gives you, because if you're listening to this show and if you're interested in your internal world, if you're interested in having access to information that is either a little or a lot beyond the reach of your conscious walking around waking mind, then dreams are just a wonderful source of information of all kinds. And we know that, artists and writers and scientists, all sorts of people have their creative discoveries, their ahas through their dreams. We can get medical alerts through our dreams, a type of dream called prodromal dreams that alert us even before we have any symptoms that there might be something going on we need to attend to physically. We can have prophetic dreams where we can peek around the corner of time and space to see things that haven't happened yet. And then we have dreams that alert us something is off, right? Something is not centered or balanced in our system. And these are the nightmares that I call an SOS from our unconscious. We're getting an alert that there's something we haven't attended to yet. And sometimes then these dreams will simply recur and we'll get those repetitive dreams or repetitive images or themes over and over and over again in our unconscious mind's sort of desperate, increasingly vigilant attempt to get our attention to do something differently, to bring some healing into the system. So I'd say, as a student of yourself and of the world, if you have questions about anything at all in your life, tune into your dreams, get a journal, keep track of them, both the happy, fun, sexy dreams and the scary nightmares, because they both have something to tell you. Our dreams will show us patterns in our lives that either we are delighted with or we are distressed about. There are patterns when we say, oh, this is good, and I'd like to keep repeating this pattern. Or we could say, this is not so good. I'm recognizing that this pattern is really not in the service of myself, my healing, my family. But we won't know if there's a pattern unless we've been keeping track of our dreams and noticing what types of storylines, images, emotions are reoccurring over time. And then we get to see, oh, there's a pattern here once we can connect the dots.
You have so many stories of dreams in your book. Is there one that you can share with us right now?
Well, I was talking about one this morning, actually, with a group that I connected to for a long time. But she had a repetitive dream when she was a young woman in her 20s. And in her repetitive dream, she was in some kind of a village with houses that had thatched roofs. And it was sort of a circular path around the village. I'm sort of just remembering now the dream. I don't have the story in front of me. But then what happened in her dream is she started to get chased by a giant. And she was really frightened. And this giant was chasing her and she was running. And this was a nightmare. She didn't know who the giant was or what it wanted. But somehow in her dream, she was able to hear a voice inside of her dream that said, turn around and look the giant in the eye. And she was frightened, but she trusted the voice in the dream that told her to do that. And the giant then picked her up and spun her around and started to dance with her and became a friend. So she had that dream long ago and didn't really understand or knew what it meant. And so I worked with her as a good friend of mine, and we sort of worked back and forth on this dream together about, what might it mean? What did it mean then? What might it be about now? Looking at different layers of meaning in the dream. And she said that this was a time in her life when she was feeling very lost, like she was going in circles, like the roundabout roadway in the village. And she spent some time overseas in Greece, actually. And she said, well, actually, there were houses with thatched roofs in the village that I was staying in. And she was there for a year or two, just sort of in between college and whatever happened next for her. And she was running from something. And she realized that the giant she was running from was actually, in retrospect, her own mission, her own life story, her own calling, if you will. And when she listened to the voice that said, look the giant in the eye, she had a connection of seeing eye to eye with the thing that was chasing her. And even in the dream, she had sort of the wherewithal to trust that voice And then this giant picks her up and dances her around, and she's feeling delighted by that. So when we fast forward 30, 40 years later, she's a dance therapist and she is a choreographer, and she embraced dance in her life as part of her life work. And she had been running and running from that calling for years before she had that dream.
When we have a dream and it has real intense emotion, is that a signal to pay attention to that dream? And or is that giving us an indication that we can start healing from past trauma?
Well, probably both, actually. We know that when we have an intense emotion, either in our waking life or our sleeping life, it usually means like heads up, right? Pay attention. There's something big going on here. And depending on what the emotion is, if it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, either we pay attention to feeling delighted or happy or joyful, or if we're feeling frightened or angry, we should pay attention to what's going on here. Let's figure it out, because there's something that's off kilter or off balance. If we're experiencing intense emotional states and they don't seem to be connected, at least at the moment, with what we're experiencing right now in our life. So even if they are connected with what's going on in our life, because someone may be currently experiencing traumatic events in their life, they might have had a traumatic loss, they might be dealing with an illness, they might be just in the very early recovery stages of some type of violence, or there might still be violence going on in their life. But the dreams can point us in the direction not only of healing internally, but also give us messages about what should I do? What can I do differently to either heal the places where I'm still holding on to the memory of what happened, or to make a difference and make a change in my current life so that I'm not living in a nightmare, if at all possible.
So, as we start to investigate dreams that have really upset us, do we tend to find many layers in it?
Yes. So dreams have many layers of meaning that can all be simultaneously true. So it isn't that a dream simply means just this or just that. And depending on our interests and the amount of time we have to work with the various layers of our dreams, we can use an ever deepening layer of, no pun intended, layers of inquiry to sort of peel back the meaning of the dreams. And there are many ways to look at the layers, and a lot of good dream work is based on association. What does it remind us of? Are we associating to? And one of the methodologies that I created, and it's written up in the book, is the Pardes method, that gives us a roadmap for looking at the layers of the dream. And the word Pardes is from the Hebrew, and it means orchard. And sometimes it's thought of as an allegory for the Garden of Eden, our first orchard. But it's also an acronym, and each letter of the word stands for a different layer of deepening inquiry into the text, if we're reading one of the holy texts. And I applied it to deepening layer of inquiry into our dreams. So our first layer is the dream as it is. The P in Hebrew is pshat, which simply means the simple layer. So this is the story and the images and what happens and the emotions as well that you feel when you have the dream. It's what you write down in your dream journal. Hopefully you have a journal by your bed to keep track of. That's the first layer. It is what it is. The next layer, the R, stands for the word remez, and remez in Hebrew means hint or hinted at. So this is our first layer of association, where we start to think about, oh yeah, I'm planning a vacation to go away for the winter to a warm, beach area. So that's why I had the dream last night about being on the beach in the sun. Okay, I see the connection, because I started to Google online, where am I going to stay when I go to Florida, when I go to California? So our first associations there. Or, oh, I dreamt about a dog. And yesterday when I was taking a walk, I had this lovely encounter, or I had this scary encounter with a dog. And that's the dog that showed up in my dream because I was still thinking about that encounter. So that's the second layer. The third layer, which is the D, stands for drosh. And drosh is from the word lidrosh, which means to pursue or to chase after. So this is the layer of the deepening associations that we have when we really work with the dream material. And here's where we use a variety of different methods and styles and techniques of dream work to find out what are the metaphors, what are the symbols, what's in our personal symbol compendium, if you will. What does this dream really mean to me? With deepening associations to things that may not have actually been contained in the dream at all. And we might use techniques such as the Gestalt method, where you are every character and even every object in your dream. So you might dream about the scary man part of me in the dream, or the roaring river part of me in the dream, and see what your associations are when you embody in the Gestalt version the aspects and the people in your dream. You might look something up online or in a book. What does this mean to somebody else? If you dreamt about, we'll go back to our friend the dog. So you can look up, what does a dog mean? Is there a dog totem in your life? But I always warn people to take anything they read in a dream dictionary or a symbol dictionary with a grain or several of salt, because we have universal symbols and they might mean that to you, but they might not, right? Because we all have our own individual associations and our individual idiosyncratic connections with the symbols in our dreams. So we might use a variety of different methods, as I mentioned, to do the work at this layer. Image rehearsal therapy is a method where if we had a nightmare that ended on a bad, scary note, we practice a different, happier ending, a different ending where we're safe. And then we rehearse that ending over the next week or 2 or 3 until it becomes incorporated into our dream as well. And then finally, the last layer in this methodology is the S, or the Sod, which means secret. And that is the layer where we can do our transpersonal work. There's a mystical layer here, a spiritual layer. It might be the layer where we're having visitations from departed relatives. It might be the layer in which we're dreaming not only for ourselves, but for the land and for the world as well. So we can dream for ourselves, we can dream for other people, and we can dream for the world. So dream work is a very actually powerful tool for not only individual healing, but for healing of the world as well.
So when we have a dream, how do we decipher if the dream's meant for us, for somebody else, or for the world?
It might be all three. Most of our dreams, first and foremost, are going to be for ourselves because they come from inside of us and we are dreaming them. But sometimes you might just get a message or have a sense that, wow, I had this dream and I think it's about my friend, or I think it's about my partner. And I invite people to listen to that intuitive felt sense. And we don't know for sure, but I invite people to say, well, just in case I'm peeking around the corner of time and space here, or just in case I've tuned into something that's going on in their life, tell them about it or ask them about it. Say, hey, I had this dream. I don't know if this means anything to you or not, but why don't you, I want to share it with you just in case, so you can either go get that doctor's appointment or be careful when you're driving to look both ways, because I had a dream where, a car came out of the blue and broadsided you. Make sure you stop for those stop signs that you might roll through otherwise if it's someone who tends to do that. And when we're dreaming for the world or for the land, we often have this sort of sense of being a part of the larger picture. There's a numinous quality there where we just have a sense of we're holding something that's a message not only for ourselves, but for other people as well. And then the question is, okay, so what do we do with that? Partially, it's how do we project that consciousness if it's something healing? Is there anyone we want to talk to about it if it's something that's warning? Or is it something that we simply want to hold and send out to the world, if it's something that we think is needed?
So at that point, do we really kind of just trust our intuition on which direction to go?
Well, that's a big part of it. And a lot of dream work is learning to trust ourselves and the messages that come through in non-linear style, right? Because messages don't come through to us in dreams very often in very explicit, clear, left brain, concrete scientific terms, though occasionally they do, and occasionally they can. But it is about, what do I resonate with? So we're learning to listen to the felt sense of our body's response. Eugene Gendland, who's the creator of a method called focusing, talks about this felt sense, where we tune in to, are we resonating with the message here? Are we getting an aha from something in the dream? One of the people in my dream circle the other day said, I know that that I've gotten the meaning of my dream when I feel gobsmacked by the information that is being shared with me, either what I figured out or that I have figured out in conversation with my friend or my group.
So in your book, you talk about waking dreams. What do those look like?
So waking dreams are in the realm of one of those other layers of consciousness that I mentioned before. And they're things like deja vu and coincidence and what Jung would say synchronicity. Things that come to us when we're wide awake that are a sign for us in some way, shape, or form, if we're noticing and if we're paying attention to the sign. And the synchronicities that happen are the unlikely coincidences, I think, of how Jung would term the phrase, that can catch us up by surprise and be quite informative and delightful as well, if we're paying attention. So one example of a waking dream is that when I wrote my 2 books, I took myself away for a few days to have a little writing retreat. And when I was writing the first book, it was I was out in a cabin in the woods on the lake. And I took a walk one day, and it was about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, just to, take a break between writing. And at 11 o'clock in the morning, I look up and I see an owl sitting in the tree right over my head, really, really close to me. Now, owls don't usually hang around in daylight hours. They're nocturnal. So seeing an owl that is not at dusk or in the evening is unusual in and of itself. So that was number one. And then I let my waking dream mind consider, what's an owl, right? So that's a question we ask ourselves, right? All right, when we get a sign or symbol, what is this and what does it mean to me? So owls are known as birds of wisdom. That was Athena's totem bird, Athena, the goddess of wisdom from Greek mythology. And owls are nocturnal and they see in the dark. And they're also sometimes harbingers of death or change. So there are a lot of different potential meanings that I might have to an owl. But what I took was that this was a sign for me that I had this totem watching owl, sort of protecting and paying attention to the work I was doing. I was doing nocturnal work of writing about dreams and nightmares, and the owl kind of came to give me its blessing.
When we are looking at dreams or nightmares, if we change our perspective, does that really also change the meaning that the dream could have for us or the nightmare could have for us?
Well, changing our perspective on the dream we had will help us find other meanings in the dream. But the dream itself doesn't change. The one we had is the dream as we dreamt it. But as we work with the dream material, particularly when we're working with nightmares, with scary dreams, and if they're repetitive, as we decipher either on our own, if we're doing the work on our own, or with a friend, a family member, or a professional, depending on the layer of if any of the listeners know that they have a history of trauma, then they might want to do this work together with someone who knows how to work deeply and carefully with trauma. So that's one of the things also, and I talk about in the book, is how to, I have another method that we do slow, careful work with the scariest of nightmares to avoid re-traumatization. But the whole point of doing dream work with frightening dreams is in part to learn the messages that they have come to bring us so that we can take the negative charge off. And in doing so, we then get a different perspective. So if we have the resources, if we have grounded and safe in our lives and in the dream work that we're doing of creating a safe harbor from which to look at the dream, then we get to go in like my friend did with the giant dream. She found her safe place right in the dream. Not everybody can do that. So we can create the safety before going into the dream. That's part one of the Gaia method, the guided active imagination approach. And when we have our posse of resources that we need, the people, the divine beings, the pets, the animals, the objects, where we feel safe and comfortable and connected, then we can go into the scary dream and look around and talk with the monster and confront them if need be and find out why they're there and change things around. And by doing that dream work, then automatically our perspective will change, because the dream will start to change as we resolve whatever created it in the first place.
You touched on something that I'd like to dive more into, and it's the Gaia method that you use. How can we look at trauma and our dreams by using this method?
Over the years, and I've been trained in doing a variety of different forms of trauma treatment using trauma-informed therapeutic approaches of a variety of different kinds, including traditional ways of working as well as more untraditional or non-traditional, particularly EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a method that allows us to access both sides of our brain while attending to a cognitive behavioral protocol and eye movements that go back and forth that allow us to sort of pendulate back and forth between the two sides of our brain while being held in a safe space and in a resource space. So over the years of doing work with people who've had trauma in their lives, I've come to appreciate how important it is to start from a place of safety so that when we get into the scary, dysregulating material, we have a place to come back to and to ground and recenter ourselves. And that doesn't always exist or hadn't always exist in the world of people working with nightmares, because sometimes we might get so excited and enthusiastic when someone shares a nightmare with us, if we're a layperson or even a professional, that we go in too fast. And then the risk is, and I've had people come to me who said, I talked to somebody else about the dream, and they said they thought I was having a psychotic break and I better go to the hospital. I said, oh, well, that sounds pretty frightening. Let me talk with you if you'd like about your dream and see if we have the same opinion. And it turned out, in my opinion, that was not the case at all, that her dream was clearly metaphoric and had a variety of layers of meaning, none of which was that she should run to the nearest emergency room. So the Gaia method is based on sort of two pillars of doing nightmare work. And one pillar is Jungian active imagination approach, where you can re-enter the dreamscape and converse with and interact with the characters and the scene in the dream in an active waking way to get more understanding and clarity and make changes. And the other pillar is best practice trauma treatment. And this is where we start with safety. So safety first. And based on the work with EMDR, part one, so in the Gaia method, there's a part one and a part two, and then a bridge between the two. And in part one, before going into doing the active imagination work inside the dream, I ask the person or the people, if I'm working in a group, to really find resources for themselves. Who would you want with you if you had to face a lion, or if you had to face a monster or a hurricane or whatever the scary thing in the dream was? And I asked them to collect all the resources that they could possibly think of, living or dead, people they know, people they've just heard of, people in their families, movie stars, characters from books, famous singers. One of my clients told me that he was going to bring Gandalf from Lord of the Rings with him, the wizard Gandalf, to protect him before doing the dream work. And one of the kids that I worked with said she was going to bring Mary Poppins as the perfect magic person to protect her before she worked with her dream. People bring their pets. So, and objects as well. So I ask people, is there any amulet or talisman or symbolic object that has some meaning for you, either actual or imaginary, that you'd like to have with you, before going into the dark and scary place? And people name all kinds of things, ranging from someone said, I'm going to wear my wedding ring because I feel safe with my partner in my marriage. And someone else said, I have this stone that I picked up from the riverbank that is shaped like a heart, and I'm going to bring my heart stone in with me. And one of my millennials was great. She said, I'm bringing my cell phone because I want to be able to call someone if I need to reach out when I'm inside the dream. And also my cell phone has a flashlight. So because it's dark in there and I might need to turn the flashlight on. So I thought that was a great idea for her to bring with her. So we gather all these things up before going in to the belly of the beast, into the depth of the nightmare. And then the bridge is I invite people, now with all these resources, go and peek inside the dream from the outside and see if there's anything there that you might have missed or you forgot to mention the first time when you were sharing the dream that is already a resource that you already have inside of yourself that you might just not have noticed the first time or not have said. And very often people will find something in their dream that was there that they didn't realize was a protection for them or a comfort for them, ranging from a being of some sort or a person that was sort of off to the side, or a tree that had magical powers of wrapping its branches around them to protect them if need be. But whatever it is, then with all the resources, we go into the dream and do the active imagination work of interacting with the monster and the dragon and the shadow figures and the pirate or whoever or whatever it was that was threatening them in the dream, with this sense of safety, so that already changes the experience of the dream. Because first time through, when someone has a terrible nightmare, they don't have these safe people and objects with them. So going into the dream now with a sense of backup and protection is different. And B, the sense that this time they're no longer facing their fears alone. And being accompanied in this work is a beautiful healing protection to allow people to face things that they might not have had the ability to do were they still on their own.
With all the people you've worked with, do you tend to see like a theme with the different nightmares that happen?
Well, yes and no. There are some universal nightmare themes that people have that are pretty universal. And again, they are idiosyncratic to the dreamer, though. So we often, some common themes that we see are things like being chased by something. That's a common theme. Being trapped in some way, having an animal attacking them or stalking them. Dreams of falling, ironically, dreams of teeth falling out go in a category all of their own. And often in transitional times in our lives, when we're losing one stage of our life and moving into another, Like when we're, 7 years old or so, and we start losing our teeth. And then in adolescence, we might grow an extra pair of wisdom teeth, or in older life, we might lose teeth and need some kind of, supplemental teeth to help us. So it seems like that's a theme that people go through at different times in their life. Themes of beings from another realm, like monsters and vampires and ghosts and being from the beyond. So, and then dreams of injury or dreams of being sick in some way. Depending on what's going on in the individual's life and what's going on in the world, we might see these common themes show up in nightmares.
So can we use dream work to better connect with our past, our present, and our future?
Oh, absolutely. And ironically, I just finished teaching a class called Finding the Gifts and Healing the Traumas of Our Ancestors Through Dream Work. And in doing deep dream work, because some of the traumatic events that we struggle with happen to us personally in our own lives, and some are part of what's called in IFS, internal family systems, legacy burdens, which means we have inherited things from our family systems that we didn't necessarily live through ourselves, but have nonetheless inherited through a process called methylation, which is actually a genetic encoding that we're learning about through the process that we're learning more and more through the science of epigenetics, how we inherit styles, emotions, and events that happen to people in our past, both the positive and the negative. So when we're doing the dream work, we can not only find the bright ones in our past that have gifts for us that we can share with others in our lives, but to find our ancestors that have suffered or have experienced traumatic events in our family system or in our culture, and bring some healing to them. And then we get to carry that forward, right? So we can heal our ancestors in doing dream work, and we can heal our descendants. And by descendants, it's not only children we might have, but to bring out the messages we get from doing the dream work of healing that goes forwards and backwards in time.
Well, it sounds like a very powerful workshop and experience to go through.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was. I think it was. I know it was powerful for me, and I think it was powerful for the class members as well.
So, is there any point in facing and maybe befriending our fear when we have dreams?
Well, that is one of the ways of resolving and conquering the fear, is that which we run from continues to pursue us. So we want to be able to turn and face the fear and face the scary aspects that are occurring in our dream. And part of what the Gaia method, I believe, does is help us to feel strong and resourced enough to be able to do that. Because if we don't, the fear will stay with us. So the goal is to find out, what is it about? Where does it come from? There's a phrase in polyvagal theory called to tend and befriend. So we want to tend and befriend the monsters and the fears in our dreams so that we can make an alliance. We can learn what they have to learn. We can offer them healing, and then they can offer us a gift in return. So our tendency, and it's a pretty normal tendency, is if we're having a nightmare or a scary dream to not want to look at it, to kind of put it away and not think about it and get as far away from it as we can. But things that are buried have a way of resurfacing. And if there's something our system is not at peace with, it will just keep coming back until we turn to face it and figure out, what does it need and what do we need and how do we heal from this fear, whatever it may be generated from.
In your book, you talk about shadow work. What is that?
So the shadow, again, this is a Jungian phrase, and it's the part of ourself that we are embarrassed of or would rather not acknowledge or are frightened of. And Jung talked about how the shadow can show up in our dreams, both as a dark figure, but also as anything that we are running from or that we're uncomfortable with. So the shadow can be the parts of ourselves that we would rather not encounter, that we don't want to admit having as part of our personalities or our lifestyle, and that we want to kind of remain invisible. So the flip side of the shadow, though, is the light. So in working with and addressing and befriending our shadow, we then get a chance to move into the light. And so many of the dreams of people that I've worked with who've had dark figures or scary figures in their dreams, once they do the work around that, find that they have another layer of lightness. The shadow isn't a bad thing necessarily. It's just it's the dark part. It's left behind, or simply sometimes it's just the unknown. It could be a personification of things you've rejected about yourself, or that you'd rather not know, where we're caught in shame or guilt or embarrassment about something. And these shadows can come from our own personal life, and they can come from the family system as well. So we're looking at, is there a pattern in the family where a shadow shows up? One woman, for example, was having a lot of dreams where, and in her waking life, she was very sort of inhibited and shut down and felt very frightened of being sexually active in her waking life, and saw potential partners as someone to be feared. Now, this person herself had not had a history of sexual assault or violence, so she was kind of curious about where this came from. And she started to have dreams where she saw an older woman telling her to watch out for men because they only have one thing in mind. And she realized when she would wake up from these nightmares that was actually the voice of her mother. And when she asked her mother about it, she said, well, that's what I learned from my mother, because it turned out that 2 generations back, her grandmother had been sexually assaulted and passed on this message that it wasn't safe to be in the world. It wasn't even her mother's personal experience, and it wasn't even her personal experience, but that shadow had been following them in her waking and her sleeping life. And once she identified, oh, this is what it was about, this is where it came from, she could then send healing back to her grandmother to the other side. She was no longer alive, and reframe the story for herself by saying, oh, okay, this is actually not my story. I don't have to carry this as if it were something that was true for me. And there was a great healing there in figuring out what this shadow was.
Oh, Linda, I mean, we haven't even touched a small portion of your book. I felt that it had so much great information. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Thank you. So I have a couple of websites, and the book itself has a website, so they could find it at www.PTSDreams, all one word, .com. And that'll tell you a little bit more about the book and what's contained in it. And just to say, each chapter is full of examples and stories and dreams relating to the theme of the chapter. And each chapter also has a variety of exercises in it to help you work through the material on your own with sort of step-by-step exercises to do. So that's one place. And the other book that I wrote on modern dream work is on similar kind of website, which is www.moderndreamwork.com. And that follows the theme for our Wizard of Oz fans of looking at the journey, the way Dorothy journeyed from Kansas to Oz and back again as the underlying theme of finding our way back home through our dreams. And then I have a personal professional website, Linda Yael Schiller, would be LindaYael SCHILLER And that tells you more about me and my practice and the various types of work that I do in the world.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you, Linda. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, PTSDreams. Transform your nightmares from trauma through healing dreamwork. PTSDreams is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf there, just ask for them to order it. So radio still remains the #1 way of advertising to millions of listeners. If you have a book or product that you think would be great on the radio, contact us at mariannepastana.com for more information on advertising on KMET 1490 AM, an ABC Talk News affiliate. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.